The data that has been presented here, which is extremely important and should not be mistreated, I should say, but
мы не должны игнорировать их. Это здорово, что мы все собираем данные. Я сейчас больше 20 лет уже занимаюсь тоже собиранием данных. Работал в Монголии, в Израиле, проводя мониторинг миграционной популяции, Чернобыль. Даже сейчас я не буду представлять данные.
Is to bring to the audience here and to stress is the fact that there is a world beyond the steppe eagles.
Существует мир, который также принадлежит степному орлу, но это мир сохранения, это сохранение степного орла, это мир тех людей, которые принимают решения, от которых зависит сохранение степного орла. То, что мы делаем сейчас, мы пытаемся понять, исследовать биологию, экологию и пытаемся предугадать, что данный вид может быть подвергаться риску электрификации и убита током. Сейчас мы понимаем, что недостаточно принятых действий, что степной орел не воспринимается пока как вид, который подвержен угрозе. И что чем я занимаюсь последние 20 лет,
is how absurd can humans be, okay? And that's sort of pointing a finger back at us and saying, we are essentially doing a lot for steppe eagles in the field, we are not doing enough for it in politics. And I'd like to start out with telling you some of the basics of the problem. First of all, literature. Most of the literature out there has these kinds of quotations. That steppe eagles are the most common eagle species of its size in the world and is therefore not considered to be threatened. Right. Next, we can carry on to the big, and this is from the Handbook of the Birds of the World, which is sort of like a Bible for all of us raptor researchers. The next one is, of course, and that, by the way, I think you all know Mike McGrady. You might not recognize me. Okay, so that's us with the steppe eagle. I think that's now 30 years ago. So, and that's in Eilat, which is where I've been working since. With a cannon net that you can see on the ground. But the next book that came out was by Ferguson Leeds and David Christie on Raptors of the World. Also that big, voluminous book, which essentially has become another one of our Bibles. If that was the Old Testament, this one has become the New Testament. And we can essentially say that they too pick up on what was said in the Handbook of the Birds. And they say locally not uncommon, but then I find this kind of a very interesting sentence. Even common, but rare and declining in most of range. If you can explain that to me, I'm in trouble. And then they go on to say, in European Russia, there are an estimated 20,000 pairs, but it is rare everywhere else, okay? But no one bothered to ask the Russians, okay? And essentially, as I said, I've been studying steppe eagles and migration. This was one of my first papers on the problem of the steppe eagles that have grown, because immediately in 87, 88, 89, what I documented in Eilat was a drop of an average of 40,000 steppe eagles every spring migrating through Eilat to less than 10,000. The bigger problem was not the drop in total numbers, but the number of juveniles, which dropped from 30% to less than 9%, and it has stayed there ever since, by the way. So what we're talking of is a potential of recruitment in the future breeding populations. And this, by the way, fits in very nicely with what we just heard in the first talk of this symposium by Dr. Palyarkin, where he says that the age group of the number of the population breeding has dropped considerably, and there are fewer and fewer adults, that is more than 6 years old, in the breeding population right now, which is also a concern because we all recognize that experience is a very important factor which influences breeding success. And then here's a letter I wrote to Dr. Karyakin back in 2009, and where we communicated quite a bit. And where since when I've been fighting with BirdLife International, with IUCN, to have the status of the steppe eagle upgraded as of concern. And that's when Igor wrote to me, the steppe eagle is the most threatened species of genera Aquila in Russia. No one else seems to have picked up on that, even though Igor also wrote this in the Globally Threatened Forum when we had a kind of a questionnaire on what to do with the steppe eagles, because I was raising too much dust, as BirdLife International called it. And Igor wrote this in his report, and excuse me, Igor, for quoting you, but according to my surveys during the last year, he essentially, steppe eagle has catastrophically decreased in number for the last 10 years, more than 10 times in some territories, and has become extinct in 3 regions. He goes on to specify exactly the European Russia, Asian Russia, and exactly how many breeding pairs there are, or the estimates, the range, and he's giving the numbers here. I mean, how much more difficult should it be for a technocrat or a bureaucrat to simply fit this into the global picture and crank out a status? Well, the answer is no. The answer is very difficult for someone who sits somewhere in Cambridge or in Oxford and to try and factor that what's happening out on the steppes. And what we get is, this thing, by the way, hasn't changed. I checked this in 2009 before the Raptor conference in Scotland. I downloaded this last week, as you can see, on 12th of September 2013. From the same, nothing has changed. They still stick to the same numbers. But they have added that it's gone extinct in Ukraine, Moldova, Romania, Bulgaria. And now we heard yesterday from a colleague from Kazakhstan that it's also disappearing from the northern and western parts of Kazakhstan. So it's the decrease eastward continues. And what I have highlighted down there is that despite the fact that the population is decreasing, the bottom line is the status still remains of least concern. That means, gentlemen, we may study the steppe eagle to death. It will not help its status if we do not get this changed. So that is what is important from the conservation point of view. However, since I was requested to come here and talk to you about migration and wintering, I'll also go into that as to the kinds of things that are being overlooked by us researchers. So from that point of view, I'd like to say, yes, entirely migratory on a very broad front. We're talking of a species that goes into Africa or subcontinental India, where little is known about it, and essentially is a bird with great mobility on the face of the earth. And essentially, literature is limited. The literature on this is extremely limited. Most of the literature, and here, Dr. Pandey, who spoke also in the beginning of the session, gave a very nice rundown how there is a lot of obscure, grey literature, especially in the Indian subcontinent, of which we have no knowledge, or about the knowledge about migratory flyways for the species, and hence it will be really interesting for them to put this out as a follow-up, just not the ones that have come out in the years 2000 telling us what's happening up here or in Nepal. But most studies were conducted from Gibraltar to Eilat in Israel, and these are some of the reports beginning up. In my years here, I've done slightly over 60 papers on migratory birds, different species. Mayberg has been working on satellite telemetry in the region, including, but I'll come to that in a moment. And then Richard Porter of BirdLife International sort of read a rehash of that initial paper 30 years later, but then that boomeranged into something else, which I will mention in a moment. This is from Richard Porter's report to BirdLife International, where he clearly states that where the migratory flyways are, you can say this is a typical blueprint for steppe eagle migration. That we know exactly what is happening over here in Israel. We know what's happening on the Egyptian side, since we had Sinai for quite a few years. But we don't know what is happening down here in Bab el-Mandeb. We do know, and one of our colleagues before showed that some of the eagles ringed in Russia, I think it was Igor, were found in Yemen or in the Saudi Arabian Peninsula down here. Okay? But note this, that this is the major crossing of the steppe eagles in the spring. This is where you will get, I should say, anywhere to 60 to 80% of the steppe eagles that come through the Middle East at this juncture. But the problem is now these papers, which look very innocent, which look very nice. They give us exactly that steppe eagles can be up to 25% of the migratory population of that area. This is at Jabal al-Zayt, okay? This is at that crossing point from Egypt, from mainland Africa, to Sinai, to Eilat, to where I am. Well, the Egyptians have gone and built one of the biggest known wind turbine farms right on that ridge over there. And this is the data of the survey on that ridge. Okay, so from that point of view, good luck to us all. So what I'm talking about, this is that crossing point where the steppe eagles are coming across. This is that ridge, Jabal al-Zayt, which has now become one big wind farm. Another thing that needs to be taken into account is climate change. Our world is changing. The birds are reacting accordingly. The environment is reacting accordingly. And essentially, what has happened to the steppe eagles is that if back in the 1990s, we would see the first of the steppe eagles, the vanguard, turn up around early February, they're doing it now around Christmas. Okay? So they're coming back earlier. Are they coming back to the breeding grounds earlier? No one's answered that. But they certainly are moving through our areas 2 months earlier than they did just 20 years ago. So this is something that also needs to be of concern. Where are the birds spending those 2 months? This is for my Polish friend. I put the slide in. I promised him that Mayberg did this work of catching 16 steppe eagles and putting satellite transmitters on them. Only one of them, but the problem was he caught them on migration. He was lucky that only one of them came back to Kazakhstan and bred. All the rest simply sort of disappeared into thin air, and he didn't really get much good data except on the wintering grounds. But this was the bird that he got the most data from. So trying to put satellite transmitters on birds on migration is pretty risky. I'm part of a group working with red-footed falcons in Hungary, and I've been working red-footed falcons, as you can see, right from the beginning. Yes, that's me, 30 years ago. We are talking about us putting transponders on these birds and then recatching them a year later and tracking their data. Now, what Professor Mayberg has done is simply tracking them with the regular GPS and getting a reading once a week or something like that. However, what we have done is getting 4-hour readings every 4 hours. And when you do that, you can correlate that with weather. Okay, this is a data point by Professor Mayberg. This is the black ones are our red-footed falcons. And when you take, what you can see here is a map of the thunderstorms over the tropical rainforest of Africa. Okay, this is the African coastline. And what you can see is the birds are actually navigating through the rainstorms. Okay, so they will come through these high points. This is what the birds are doing. So you can actually come down to pinpointing how these birds are navigating through weather systems. And this is what I would strongly recommend we need to do for our steppe eagles. As I said, climate change is a factor. We know everything is moving northwards. We expect everything by 2090 to be 500 kilometers further north in distribution than it is today. And if this is going to happen, we have to start thinking ahead for the steppe habitats, including the steppe eagle. So, my summary for now is that we urgently need national inventories which need to be put out on Russia, Kazakhstan and Mongolia, which are the stronghold for the steppe eagle. We need to prioritize all the adverse effects which our speakers have put out here, including taking climate change into account. But what we lack most, folks, publish, 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 because otherwise, like Red Butler said to Scarlett O'Hara, what the conservation organizations are going to tell you is, I don't give a damn, my dear. So from that point of view, if you don't want this to happen to you, to us, and we are the scarlets of the steppe eagle world, we are going to have to really take this thing into going into publication of our data in scientific papers, in scientific journals, peer-reviewed journals. I will finish by quoting a gentleman I adore as an orator, Winston Churchill, who back in 1945 delivered a speech, confirmed anti-fragility of mankind. And he said, and I think this is extremely correct about steppe eagles, it is unfortunate habit of civilized societies to sleep and slumber until danger nearly overtakes them, and the want of foresight, the willingness to act when action will be simple and effective, the lack of clear thinking, the confusion of counsel until the emergency comes, until self-preservation strikes its jarring gong. I hope we don't do this to the steppe eagle. Thank you.